My name is Neville, and I'm 52 years old. I've been sitting in this same armchair in my living room every morning for the past 3 years, looking out at the small garden behind my house here in suburban Denver. The roses Margaret planted are still blooming even without her gentle touch. My daughter Sarah moved back home 2 weeks ago after her divorce, and I thought having her here would fill the empty spaces in this house. But yesterday, we had the biggest argument we've ever had. And this morning, the silence between us feels heavier than the Colorado mountain air. She's 28, stubborn as her mother, and just as determined to follow her heart, even when her head should know better. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment and let me know what state or country you're in. And if this story resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories. Trust me, you won't believe what happened next when Sarah handed me that strange-tasting coffee. Let me paint you a picture of how we got here. This 2-story house has been my home for 15 years, ever since Margaret and I saved enough to move out of our cramped apartment downtown. I used to work as a mechanical engineer for Boeing, designing aircraft components that kept people safe 30,000 feet in the air. The work was demanding but rewarding, and I was good at it. Really good. But 3 years ago, everything changed when Margaret was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. I took early retirement to care for her. We fought that disease together for 8 months, but cancer doesn't care how much love you have or how many prayers get said. Margaret passed away on a Tuesday morning in October, holding my hand and telling me to take care of our Sarah. Those were her last words, and they've echoed in my head every single day since. Sarah had been living in Chicago with her husband Marcus, a corporate lawyer who made good money, but had the emotional depth of a puddle. They seemed happy from the outside, at least in the photos she'd send us. But after Margaret's funeral, I started noticing things. Sarah would call less frequently, and when she did, her voice sounded strained. She'd make excuses for why Marcus couldn't visit, or why they had to cut phone calls short. 2 weeks ago, she showed up at my door with 2 suitcases and red eyes. She'd filed for divorce. Turns out Marcus had been having an affair with his paralegal for over a year. Sarah found out when she discovered love letters in his briefcase. Not emails or texts, mind you, but actual handwritten letters. The betrayal cut deep, and she came home to Colorado to heal and figure out what came next. I thought I'd be helpful by creating structure. Sarah needed routine, I figured. She needed practical advice and a solid plan to get back on her feet. I've always been a problem solver. That's what engineers do. We identify issues and create solutions. But I was treating my daughter's broken heart like a mechanical failure, and that was my first mistake. The trouble started during dinner last night. Sarah had been quiet all week, picking at her food and spending most of her time in her old bedroom upstairs. I'd made her favorite meal, meatloaf with mashed potatoes and green beans, the recipe Margaret used to make. I thought it might cheer her up and get her talking. We ate in silence for about 10 minutes before Sarah finally spoke up. "Dad, I've been thinking about what I want to do next," she said, setting down her fork. "I want to sell the apartment in Chicago and use the money to start something new." I nodded, relieved she was finally talking about practical matters. "Good thinking. Real estate market's decent right now. You should be able to get a fair price. Then you can find a smaller place, maybe something here in Denver, and look for a stable job with benefits." Sarah shook her head. "That's not what I meant. I want to open a bakery." The words hung in the air like smoke from burnt toast. A bakery. My daughter, who had a college degree in business administration, who had worked for a marketing firm in Chicago, wanted to open a bakery. "Sarah, that's not a career, that's a hobby," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "You need something stable, something with a steady income and health insurance. You've just gone through a divorce. This isn't the time to take unnecessary risks." Her jaw tightened, just like Margaret's used to when she was gearing up for a fight. It's not a hobby, Dad. I've been baking since I was 12 years old. I'm good at it, really good, and it's something I actually care about. Caring about something doesn't pay the bills, I replied. Look, I know you're hurting right now, and you want to make changes, but starting a business is complicated. Do you have a business plan? Have you researched the competition? Do you know what the failure rate is for new restaurants? Sarah's face was getting red, but she kept her voice controlled. I've been researching it for months, Dad. Even before the divorce, I know exactly what I want to do, and I know it can work. Months. I set my own fork down harder than necessary. You've been planning this while you were still married. Sarah, you can't just run away from responsibility because things get tough. You need to think rationally about this. That's when she exploded. Rationally, like how rationally I thought about marrying Marcus because he was stable and safe and everything you told me to look for in a husband. How did that rational decision work out for me? Dad, the words stung because they were true. I had liked Marcus when Sarah first brought him home. He was polite, well-educated, and had a clear career path. I thought he was exactly what Sarah needed. I was wrong. That's not fair, I said. Marcus fooled all of us. That doesn't mean you should swing completely in the opposite direction and make an emotional decision that could ruin your financial future. Sarah stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. You know what, Dad? You never believed in my dreams just like Marcus never did. All my life you've told me to be practical, to be safe, to choose the sensible option. Well, I did that, and it got me a cheating husband and a life I hated. Maybe it's time I started believing in myself, even if no one else will. She stormed upstairs, and I heard her bedroom door slam. I sat there in the kitchen surrounded by dirty dishes and the weight of my own words. I'd handled it all wrong, but my pride wouldn't let me admit it. Instead, I convinced myself that she'd cool off and realize I was right. I was trying to protect her from making another mistake. I spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, replaying the argument, and wondering what Margaret would have said. She always knew how to talk to Sarah in ways I never could. The next morning I woke up at 5:30, same as always. My routine has been the same for 3 years. Shower, coffee, read the newspaper, check the garden. Then start on whatever project needs attention around the house. Routine keeps me grounded when everything else feels uncertain. I went downstairs expecting to find the kitchen empty, but Sarah was already up, standing by the window with her back to me. She was still in her pajamas, a faded Colorado State University t-shirt and flannel pants, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked so much like her mother in that moment that it took my breath away. Neither of us spoke. I went through my normal coffee routine, grinding the beans and setting up the machine. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the tense silence. Sarah poured herself a glass of orange juice, but didn't sit down. We were both being stubborn, waiting for the other person to make the first move. After about 20 minutes of this uncomfortable dance, I took my coffee and newspaper into the living room. I settled into my armchair, the same spot where I'd been sitting when she arrived 2 weeks ago, and tried to focus on the news. But I kept glancing toward the kitchen, wondering what Sarah was thinking. About 10 minutes later, I heard footsteps approaching. Sarah appeared in the doorway, carrying a steaming mug, her expression softer than it had been the night before. She walked over and set the mug on the small table beside my chair. "Dad, I made you coffee," she said quietly. "Can we talk?" I looked up at her, surprised by the gesture. The mug was one of Margaret's favorites, white ceramic with small blue flowers around the rim. Sarah had filled it exactly the way I liked it, with just a splash of cream. "I don't want us to be angry at each other," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom wouldn't want this." Hearing her mention Margaret created a crack in the wall I'd built around my stubbornness. Sarah was right. Margaret had always been the peacemaker in our family, the one who could smooth over any argument with her gentle wisdom and endless patience. "Let's make peace," Sarah said, gesturing toward the coffee. "Please, Dad, just drink this, and let's talk like adults." I picked up the mug, inhaling the rich aroma. But something was off. The smell was familiar, yet different, with an underlying sharpness I couldn't identify. The coffee looked normal, the same medium brown color I expected. But there was something else there, a slight metallic scent that didn't belong. "Did you add something different to this?" I asked, holding the mug closer to examine it. Sarah's eyes flickered with something I couldn't read. Nervousness, maybe. "I just thought you might like it a little differently today. Something to help you relax." I studied her face, trying to understand what she wasn't telling me. But the desire to repair our relationship outweighed my suspicion. I took a small sip, then a larger one. The taste was indeed different. There was the expected coffee flavor, but underneath it was something bitter and slightly medicinal. Not unpleasant exactly, but unexpected. "Sarah, what did you put in here?" I asked again, setting the mug down. She sat down on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I just want us to be okay, Dad. I want us to understand each other." I took another sip, larger this time, because I could see how much this gesture meant to her. Whatever she'd added, it was her way of trying to bridge the gap between us. The strange taste was probably just a different brand of coffee, or maybe some kind of flavoring she thought I'd enjoy. But as I continued drinking, I started to feel something else. A slight lightheadedness, as if I'd stood up too quickly. My heart seemed to be beating a little faster than normal, and there was a strange tingling sensation in my fingertips. The strange sensations started subtly creeping in around the edges of my consciousness, like morning fog rolling over the mountains. At first, I attributed the slight dizziness to getting up too early, or maybe drinking the coffee too quickly on an empty stomach. But as the minutes passed, the feeling intensified rather than subsided. My heart was definitely beating faster now, and not from the caffeine. This was different, irregular. I could feel my pulse hammering in my temples and at the base of my throat. The newspaper in my hand seemed heavier than it should, and the words on the page kept sliding out of focus. "Dad, are you okay?" Sarah's voice sounded like it was coming from far away, even though she was sitting just a few feet from me on the couch. I tried to answer, but my mouth felt dry and thick. "I feel a little strange," I managed to say, setting the newspaper aside. "What exactly did you put in that coffee?" Sarah's face went pale, and she leaned forward, studying me with growing alarm. "I put in a crushed aspirin," she said quickly. "I read online that aspirin is good for heart health, and you've been so stressed lately. I thought it might help you relax." "An aspirin," I repeated, my brain struggling to process this information. "Sarah, you can't just give people medication without telling them. How much did you use?" "Just one regular aspirin. I crushed it up and mixed it in." Her voice was getting higher with panic. "Dad, you don't look good. You're really pale." She was right. I could feel the blood draining from my face, and a cold sweat was breaking out across my forehead. But more alarming than any of that was the growing pressure in my chest. It started as a mild tightness, like someone was gently squeezing my rib cage, but it was rapidly becoming something more serious. "Dad, talk to me. What's happening?" Sarah had moved to the edge of her seat, ready to spring into action. I tried to stand up, thinking maybe I just needed to walk around, but the moment I got to my feet, a wave of nausea hit me like a freight train. The room tilted sideways, and I had to grip the arm of the chair to keep from falling. That's when the real pain started. It began as a burning sensation in the center of my chest, then spread outward like someone had lit a fire behind my breastbone. The pain radiated up into my neck and down my left arm, and suddenly I understood exactly what was happening to me. "Sarah," I gasped, my voice barely audible. "Call 911. I think I'm having a heart attack." For a split second, Sarah froze, her eyes wide with terror. Then her training kicked in. Years ago, she'd taken a first aid course as part of her job requirements, and those lessons came flooding back. "Sit down, Dad. Don't try to move." She was already reaching for her phone, her fingers flying over the screen. "Yes, I need an ambulance at 427 Maple Street. My father is having a heart attack." The pain was getting worse, spreading across my entire chest, like a vice being tightened. I could hear Sarah talking to the emergency dispatcher, her voice steady despite her obvious panic. She was describing my symptoms, giving our address, answering questions about my medical history. "They want to know if you've taken any medication recently," she said, covering the phone with her hand. "Tell them about the aspirin." I whispered each word in effort. Sarah relayed this information, then listened intently to whatever instructions the dispatcher was giving her. "Dad, they want you to lie down on the floor. Can you do that?" With Sarah's help, I managed to lower myself to the living room carpet. The pain was excruciating now, but lying down did seem to help a little. Sarah knelt beside me, her hand on my forehead, her touch cool against my burning skin. "The ambulance will be here in 10 minutes, she said, her voice shaking. "Just stay with me, Dad. Keep talking to me." "I'm not going anywhere," I managed to say, though honestly I wasn't sure that was true. The pain was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, and I could feel my strength ebbing away with each labored breath. But then something remarkable happened. The pain, while still intense, seemed to stabilize rather than continue worsening. The crushing sensation in my chest remained constant, but didn't increase. It was as if something had stopped the heart attack from progressing beyond a certain point. "Dad, how do you feel now? Any different?" Sarah asked, noticing that my breathing had become slightly less labored. "Still hurts like hell," I said, "but maybe not getting worse." Through the haze of pain and fear, a strange thought occurred to me. The aspirin Sarah had given me, the medication I'd been angry about just minutes before, might actually be helping. I'd heard somewhere that aspirin could prevent blood clots from forming during a heart attack. Could her unauthorized doctoring actually be saving my life? The wail of sirens grew louder as the ambulance approached our street. Sarah squeezed my hand, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she whispered. "This is all my fault." "No," I said, finding enough strength to squeeze back. "You might have just saved me." And the next few hours passed in a blur of medical equipment, urgent voices, and the controlled chaos of emergency medicine. The paramedics were professional and efficient, asking rapid-fire questions, while hooking me up to monitors and starting an IV line. Sarah rode with me in the ambulance, holding my hand, and providing medical history information I was too weak to give myself. At Denver General Hospital, they rushed me straight into the cardiac care unit. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the cardiologist on duty, was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and steady hands. After reviewing my EKG results and blood work, she confirmed what we already suspected. "You've had what we call a myocardial infarction," she explained, using the medical term for heart attack. "Based on your enzyme levels and the EKG patterns, it appears to be what we classify as a mild to moderate event. The good news is that we caught it very early, which significantly improves your prognosis." Sarah and I exchanged glances. Early detection had been crucial, and we both knew why that had happened. "Doctor, there's something you should know," Sarah said, her voice still shaky from the morning's events. "I gave him a crushed aspirin in his coffee about 20 minutes before the symptoms started. I didn't tell him I was doing it." Dr. Chen raised her eyebrows. "You gave him aspirin without his knowledge. I know it sounds crazy," Sarah rushed to explain. "I've been worried about his stress levels since my mom died, and especially this week after we had a big argument. I read that aspirin can help prevent heart problems, so I thought maybe it would be good for him." "How much aspirin, and what kind?" Dr. Chen asked, making notes on her chart. Just one regular strength tablet, 325 milligrams. I crushed it up and mixed it into his coffee. Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment, studying my chart and lab results. While I absolutely cannot recommend giving someone medication without their knowledge, in this particular case, your daughter's actions may have significantly limited the damage from your heart attack. She went on to explain that aspirin works as a blood thinner, preventing platelets from clumping together to form clots. During a heart attack, clots can block coronary arteries and cause more extensive damage to the heart muscle. The aspirin Sarah had given me had likely prevented a more serious clot from forming, keeping my heart attack from becoming life-threatening. The timing was actually quite fortunate, Dr. Chen continued. Having aspirin in your system right as the cardiac event began gave us a crucial window of protection. We'll want to keep you here for observation for 48 hours, but your prognosis is very good. As the immediate medical crisis passed and the pain medication began to work, I found myself looking at Sarah with new eyes. She was curled up in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside my bed, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. She hadn't left my side since we arrived, turning down offers of food and coffee, refusing to go home to rest. "Sarah," I said softly, not wanting to wake her if she'd finally fallen asleep. Her eyes opened immediately. "How are you feeling, Dad?" "Better. Tired, but better." I paused, trying to find the right words. "I owe you an apology." She shook her head. "Dad, you don't need to apologize for anything. I'm the one who almost killed you by putting medication in your coffee without telling you. You didn't almost kill me. You saved my life." I reached for her hand, noting how small and cold it felt in mine. "But that's not what I need to apologize for. I'm sorry about last night. I'm sorry about the way I reacted to your bakery idea." Sarah's eyes filled with tears again. "Dad, we don't need to talk about this now. You need to rest." "Yes, we do need to talk about it. I've been lying here thinking about what you said about me never believing in your dreams. You were right." I took a shaky breath, the words coming easier now that I'd started. "Your whole life I've been so focused on keeping you safe that I forgot to trust you to make your own decisions. I thought I was being a good father by steering you toward practical choices, but I was really just being afraid." Sarah squeezed my hand. "You were trying to protect me." "I was trying to protect myself," I corrected. "I was afraid that if I supported your dreams and they didn't work out, you'd get hurt, and it would be my fault. So I talked you out of taking risks, even when those risks might have led to something wonderful." We sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the steady beeping of my heart monitor and the distant activity of the hospital corridor. Outside the window, the sun was setting over the Rocky Mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded me of Margaret's favorite sunset. "Tell me about your bakery," I said finally. Sarah looked surprised. "Dad, you really should rest. I want to hear about it. All of it. What kind of bakery, where you want to put it, what you want to specialize in. Everything." So she told me. For the next hour, Sarah described her vision in detail. She wanted to open a small neighborhood bakery specializing in artisanal breads and pastries made from scratch with locally sourced ingredients. She'd already researched several potential locations, developed recipes, and even created preliminary financial projections. The more she talked, the more I realized how thoroughly she'd thought this through. This wasn't some impulsive reaction to her divorce. Sarah had been planning and dreaming about this for years, probably since she was a teenager, working part-time at the local bakery downtown. "Why didn't you ever tell me about this before?" I asked. Sarah's smile was sad. "Because I knew what you'd say, that it was impractical, that I should focus on something more stable. So I pushed it aside and tried to want what I thought you wanted for me. And that led you to Marcus." "That led me to Marcus," she agreed. A safe, practical choice that turned out to be neither safe nor practical. I closed my eyes, feeling the full weight of my failures as a father. In trying to protect Sarah from disappointment, I'd inadvertently pushed her toward the very kind of pain I'd hoped to prevent. "When we get out of here," I said, "I want you to show me your business plan. I want to understand exactly what you're thinking, and I want to help if I can." Sarah's eyes widened. "Dad, you don't have to do that. I know you think it's a bad idea. I think I've been wrong about a lot of things," I replied. "And if my daughter is passionate about something, if she's willing to work hard and take calculated risks to pursue her dreams, then maybe it's time her old man started believing in her." The 2 days I spent in the hospital became a turning point in more ways than one. Beyond the medical monitoring and cardiac rehabilitation discussions, those 48 hours gave Sarah and me time to really talk for the first time in years. Not the surface-level conversations we'd always had about work and weather and family news, but deep discussions about dreams, fears, regrets, and hopes for the future. Sarah told me about her marriage to Marcus, how she'd slowly lost herself, trying to become the person she thought he wanted. She described the suffocating feeling of living someone else's idea of the perfect life, the way her own interests and passions had withered under constant criticism, disguised as practical advice. I told her about the loneliness of the past 3 years, how lost I'd felt without Margaret's guidance in knowing how to connect with my daughter. I admitted that my overprotectiveness came from my own insecurities, my fear that I wasn't enough to guide her safely through life without her mother's wisdom to balance my practical nature. On the morning I was discharged, Dr. Chen gave me a comprehensive care plan that included dietary changes, an exercise program, stress management techniques, and a daily low-dose aspirin regimen. The irony wasn't lost on either Sarah or me that the medication I'd be taking every day was the same one she'd secretly given me in my coffee. "I suppose I should thank you for introducing me to my new daily routine," I told her as we signed the discharge papers. Sarah laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd heard from her since she came home. "Next time, I'll ask first, I promise." When we got home, I was determined to put my apologies into action. While Sarah was unpacking the bag of medications and care instructions, I went to my home office and pulled out a legal pad and pen. If I was going to truly support my daughter's dreams, I needed to approach this the way I'd approach any important project, with careful research and detailed planning. "Sarah, can you come in here for a minute?" I called. She appeared in the doorway, still looking concerned about my health. "Dad, you should be resting." "I will rest, but first I want you to walk me through your bakery plan again. This time, I want to take notes." For the next 3 hours, Sarah shared every detail of her vision. She showed me the notebook where she'd been sketching equipment layouts, the folder of potential locations she'd found online, and the recipe collection she'd been building for years. She even had a name picked out: Margaret's Kitchen. Hearing that, she wanted to name the bakery after her mother brought tears to my eyes. "She would love that," I said. "She always said your cinnamon rolls were better than hers." "I learned from the best," Sarah replied. As I listened and took notes, I began to see Sarah's plan with the analytical mind that had served me well in my engineering career. She hadn't just been daydreaming. She'd identified a genuine market opportunity, developed a unique value proposition, and created realistic financial projections based on extensive research. The location she favored was particularly smart, a small storefront in a growing neighborhood that was currently underserved by quality bakeries. The space had been a coffee shop that had closed due to poor management, not lack of demand. The rent was reasonable, and the previous tenant had already installed much of the basic infrastructure needed for food service. "What's your biggest obstacle right now?" I asked. Setting down my pen. "Startup capital," she said immediately. Even with the money from selling the Chicago apartment, I'll need additional funding for equipment, initial inventory permits, and operating expenses for the first 6 months. I nodded, having expected this answer. Have you looked into small business loans? Some, but most lenders want to see established business credit or significant collateral. As a newly divorced woman with no business history, I'm not exactly their ideal candidate. This was where my experience and connections could actually be valuable. After 30 years in the engineering field, I'd developed relationships with people in various industries, including several who'd started their own businesses or worked in commercial lending. "Sarah, I want to make you an offer," I said. "Let me be your first investor." She shook her head immediately. "Dad, I can't take your retirement money. That's not fair to you." "Hear me out," I continued. "I'm not talking about giving you money. I'm talking about a legitimate business investment. You create a proper business plan. We agree on terms, and I provide startup capital in exchange for a small ownership stake. If the business succeeds, we both benefit. If it doesn't, I lose an investment, but you don't lose your future." Sarah stared at me for a long moment. "You're serious about this?" "Dead serious. But I have conditions." Her expression became guarded. "What kind of conditions?" "First, we do this right. Full business plan, proper legal documentation, clear agreements about roles and responsibilities. Second, you maintain majority ownership and complete operational control. This is your dream, not mine. Third, you let me help in ways that use my skills without interfering with your vision. I know people who can help with permits, equipment purchasing, maybe even finding reliable suppliers." As I outlined my proposal, I could see Sarah's excitement building. For the first time since she'd come home, her face had the animated expression I remembered from her childhood when she was describing something she was passionate about. "There's one more condition," I added. "If we do this, we do it together as business partners and as family. No more arguments where we don't speak for days. No more me dismissing your ideas without really listening. We communicate honestly, even when it's difficult." Sarah got up from her chair and walked around the desk to hug me. "Dad, I don't know what to say." "Say yes, and then let's get to work." 6 months later, I was sitting at my usual table in Margaret's kitchen, reading the morning newspaper and enjoying a cup of coffee that Sarah had made exactly the way I liked it. No secret additives this time, just perfectly brewed coffee with a splash of cream. The bakery had been open for 3 months, and it was everything Sarah had envisioned, and more. The neighborhood had embraced it immediately, drawn by the amazing aromas that drifted from the ovens, starting at 5 in the morning, and the warm, welcoming atmosphere Sarah had created. The space itself was beautiful in its simplicity. Sarah had chosen warm colors and comfortable seating that invited people to linger with their coffee and pastries. The display cases showcased her incredible breads, muffins, croissants, and the cinnamon rolls that had become legendary among the local customers. My role had evolved into something I'd never expected. Rather than being the distant investor I'd initially planned to be, I'd become Margaret's Kitchen's unofficial morning host. I arrived early most days to help with setup, chatted with regular customers, and occasionally helped with simple tasks like restocking napkin dispensers or wiping down tables. The customers seemed to enjoy having me around. Word had spread about the story behind the bakery's name and the partnership between Sarah and her father. People often stopped by my table to chat about their own family businesses or to share stories about pursuing dreams later in life. "Dad, your usual," Sarah called from behind the counter, holding up a fresh cinnamon roll. "You know me too well," I replied, folding my newspaper. As she brought over my breakfast, I marveled at the transformation in my daughter. The stressed, defeated woman who had arrived at my house 6 months ago, was gone, replaced by someone confident, creative, and genuinely happy. She moved through her domain with purpose and joy, greeting customers by name, and taking obvious pride in the products she created. My own health had improved dramatically as well. The cardiac rehabilitation program, combined with daily walks to the bakery and the stress relief of having a positive project to focus on, had strengthened my heart, both physically and emotionally. Dr. Chen had been impressed with my progress at my most recent checkup. "How are the books looking this month?" I asked, as Sarah sat down across from me with her own coffee. "Better than projected," she said with a grin. "We're actually ahead of the timeline we set for profitability. I think we might be able to expand the lunch menu sooner than we planned." "What did you have in mind?" Sarah's eyes lit up with the same excitement I'd seen that day in the hospital when she first described her vision. "Artisan sandwiches using our own bread, maybe some soups. Nothing too complicated, but enough to capture the lunch crowd from the office buildings nearby." I nodded, already thinking through the logistics. "We'd need additional equipment, probably have to reconfigure part of the kitchen workspace." "I've already been sketching some ideas," she admitted, pulling out the same notebook she'd shown me months before. "Want to see?" For the next hour, we discussed her expansion plans with the same thoroughness we'd applied to the original business concept. It was a conversation that would have been impossible 6 months earlier, before I'd learned to listen without immediately jumping to objections, and before Sarah had learned to trust that my questions came from support rather than skepticism. As the morning rush began and Sarah returned to work, I reflected on the strange chain of events that had brought us to this point. A terrible argument had led to a peace offering that had probably saved my life, which had created an opportunity for us to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect and shared purpose. The bakery was succeeding beyond our most optimistic projections, but more importantly, Sarah was thriving. She'd found her calling, and in supporting her, I'd found a new sense of purpose for my retirement years. Around noon, as I was preparing to head home, a young woman came in with her small daughter. The little girl, maybe 4 years old, pressed her face against the display case and pointed at the cinnamon rolls. "Can we get one, Mommy? They smell like Grandma's kitchen." The mother smiled and ordered 2 cinnamon rolls to go. As Sarah boxed them up, she caught my eye and winked. We both knew that creating that sense of home and comfort for families was exactly what she'd hoped to achieve. Walking home that afternoon, I thought about the conversation Sarah and I had been planning for weeks. She'd been seeing someone, a local architect named David, who'd become a regular customer. He was a good man, divorced with joint custody of 2 teenage sons, and he made Sarah laugh in a way I hadn't heard since before her marriage to Marcus. Tonight, she was going to tell me she was thinking about getting serious with him. And for the first time in my life, I was going to listen to my daughter talk about a relationship without immediately cataloging potential problems or offering unsolicited advice. I was going to trust her judgment and support her happiness, whatever form it took. The truth I'd learned over these past months was that love doesn't mean protecting people from all possible pain. Love means believing in their strength to handle whatever comes and being there to support them through both successes and failures. Sometimes the best thing a father can do is get out of his daughter's way and let her show him how capable she really is. That strange tasting coffee had saved my life in more ways than one. It had stopped a heart attack from becoming fatal. But more importantly, it had shocked me into realizing that my relationship with Sarah was heading for its own kind of heart failure. Her willingness to take action even when she wasn't sure it was the right thing to do had given both of us a second chance. Margaret would have been proud of both of us, I think. Proud of Sarah for having the courage to pursue her dreams despite the risks, and proud of me for finally learning to trust our daughter's judgment. The bakery bearing her name had become more than a business. It was a place where family bonds were strengthened, where community was built one conversation at a time, and where dreams that had been deferred could finally flourish. As I settled into my armchair that evening to wait for Sarah to come home and tell me about her new relationship, I realized I was looking forward to the conversation. Not because I wanted to approve or disapprove of her choice, but because I wanted to hear about something that was making my daughter happy. And that was a feeling worth savoring, just like that first sip of perfectly brewed coffee on a peaceful morning. Have you ever had a moment where someone's unexpected action ended up changing your life completely? Maybe a family member took a risk that initially worried you, but turned out to be exactly what you needed. I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear about second chances and learning to trust the people we love. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about family forgiveness and finding unexpected blessings in difficult moments. Thank you for listening, and remember that sometimes the most important conversations happen over a simple cup of coffee. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story.